Dr. John, how are you, sir?
Oh, not too bad, Jeremy. How are you?
Dr. John Bruni. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
You weren't too well last week, but
No,
you look fine now.
Well, I'm sort of on my first legs, not my last legs, thankfully. But now that I've gotten over the dreaded lurgy, of course, I was speaking to Caroline earlier, and it's like now I've got the hay fever because of the early spring that we've been having. So yeah. Never ends.
Never a dull moment.
No, never. Yeah.
What did you make of the new policing arrangement that we've gotten ourselves into in the South Pacific?
Look, the South Pacific is our backyard, and the shame of it is that we just don't pay enough coherent attention to this place. I mean, the Chinese are all over it like a rash, and we wonder, with the amount of money that Australia does, provide aid to the tune of a few $1 billion, how the Chinese still have basically entrance points into the region to continue to destabilize the region. So my thing really is that we need to have a more focused effort in the South Pacific. There are a whole bunch of things that we share in common, concerns for climate change, concerns about Chinese interference, concerns about, the ecology and the damage to the ecology as a consequence of pollution and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of things that we can do with the local people, but we need to win them over in a better way. And I think because we are focused so heavily on places like the Middle East, we're focused on wherever the Americans go, we go. And I mean, I understand there's a very strong argument to say that that's part of the ANZUS alliance and this is something that we all should be proud of. The Americans don't want a lickspittle. They want an able, independent-minded ally that can actually do some work for them and alleviate some of the stress from the Americans. That's the whole national security concept that Donald Trump's been pushing. If America starts disengaging from the rest of the world, that then means other countries have to step up. I don't believe we're stepping up at all. I think, yes, we're buying a couple of submarines at great cost, but we're not really stepping up in the region. We don't have a proper, focused understanding of the people, their languages, their cultures. We think that they're too small. We think that, it's much better for us as a country to shoulder the burdens of the United States wherever they end up going. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I don't buy into that. I'm much more into a more autonomous strategic policy with this country.
Well,
the South Pacific's it.
Well, we've got the bridge, or we've got the conning tower, or however you want to describe it, in the Red Sea, and we don't send a ship. We send one man, I think, or it's a small contingent of people.
Yeah. Look, I mean, in terms of going to the Red Sea, it's good that we've got some people there that can observe what the Houthis are doing, because the future of warfare now is all about the drones. It's all about the missiles. It's starting to see that, the big capital ships, the high expenditure capital ships, manned capital ships, that, the days for those vessels are starting to be eclipsed by a whole bunch of very cheap and very effective weaponry that can put them underwater, basically, So I think that to have people there is no big deal. I don't mind them to be there, observe what's going on, and hopefully learn the lessons to, filter back to the Royal Australian Navy.
Well, it's all about trying to do something about the piracy and the bloodletting that is going on there, and the blackmailing and all the rest. But when did these pirates become freedom fighters?
Oh, look, I mean, I think that this was an Iranian propaganda plan from way back. These people have. Yemen has been a failed state for a long, long time. First, it was North and South Yemen. Then they unified after a civil dispute, which killed lots of people. And then they weren't happy with how things were run as a unified country. Then the Houthis took over, the majority areas of Yemen. And they started, paying fealty to the Iranians. The Iranians are supplying them weapons. And, after October 7, they've stepped up into the breach and said, well, look, you're here, we're important, and we're going to block the Red Sea and cause all sorts of mayhem. So in that sense, that's how we got these ne'er-do-wells in a position of power. But again, it's very difficult to root these people out because a lot of their grievances are local. And what people don't understand about the Middle East is it's a tribal society. It is not Australia writ small or Australia with Arabs in it. It is a tribal society. I heard what you and Les were talking about earlier, but the conflicts among Muslims can never be underestimated. I mean, I've lived in the Middle East. Arabs, they don't necessarily like other Arabs.
I get that.
And obviously they are quite happy to, not like them to the point of killing them in some instances. Yeah. So the prejudices run very deep. Yeah. But what we tend to see is, Islam, Muslims, Arabs, they're all the same. Yeah, well, no, they're not. And I think that, taking a more nuanced look at the region is far, far better for all of us in that sense.
For years and years and years, Lebanon was what did they call it? The crossroads of the world. Yep. The most beautiful, beautiful city. And then they had that blow up. But there was a city, a country, where you had Christians, Sunnis, Shia, Druze. Yep. Hanafis too, I think, a small number of Hanafis. And they all seemed to get on reasonably well. Then something happened and they started to kill each other.
Big power politics happened to Lebanon and it's broken that country to pieces. So the only thing that makes sense about Lebanon right now is Hezbollah. And they rule the south and they've got their seats in Beirut and they've got quite a bit of influence.
And they are Sunni, are they?
No, they're Shia.
Shia.
And they pay fealty to the Iranians. The Iranians arm them, train them and supply them with whatever they need militarily. They are a state within a state. Yeah. But the thing is that they're a state really for the Shiites in Lebanon. They are not for the Christians. They're not for the Druze. They're not for any other minority group. They're only for the Shiites. So, I mean, and that's fine, except for the fact that they all live in the one country. And if there is a war, all of Lebanon gets dragged in. It doesn't matter what your religious identity, you're going to be in the crossfires. If the Israelis start hammering in, they're not going to really care what stripe of religion you come from. They're just going to drop a bomb on you.
And interesting, Dr. John, the comments you've made. If we think about what Persia was in history, a cultural centre and a beautiful city, country, and the education, everything about it was first class, the freedom women had.
Yep.
And now look what Iran is.
Yep.
And the absolute basket case.
They are. And the irony of that statement, Les, is that Iran itself is a society riven by ethnic and tribal differences. We look at Iran as this big, powerful entity. When I was living in the Middle East and studying Iran, we unpacked that country. There are so many ethnic groups. There are little wars going on. The Baluchis don't like the Azeris. The Azeris don't like the Farsi-speaking population, doesn't like the Arabs, and they're all within the borders of Iran here. We're all talking about Iranians, but of different colors and stripes. And each one is at, dagger's point against the other. And we're sitting here thinking, we're so worried about Iran because Iran is like a big threat, thinking that Iran is a big monolithic block just sitting on top of the Middle East. It is vulnerable for the countries who understand the politics of Iran. To slow them down, we must know how to subvert some of the Ayatollah's power. And there are plenty of pressure points, but no one's willing to step up. And the only thing that we see at the moment are the Israeli threats against Iran, Iran's threats against Israel, and, the little proxy wars all over the place. But to stop it, you need to go after the Iranian society and start pulling at some of the seams and seeing what happens.
It would seem that the lesson is that you might have some sort of grand idealistic plan about multiculturalism. And whether it's political or it's religious or it's racial, it seems that you've just got to really be very careful about bringing like-minded people into the country and not just throwing open the doors. How would Lebanon and how would Iran become filled with people who had different views and didn't like each other? When did that happen? Who let that sort of divisiveness come into the country?
That's going back into ancient Persian history.
So it's too late for them.
It's too late for them. But
the lesson is we don't want to go down that road.
That is true, and the only way that we can secure ourselves against that is to have a very strong Australian identity.
Yeah.
And it is something that everyone has to subscribe to. And, of course, that's not politically correct to talk about these days. We have to say...
Let's talk about it.
All right, so let's talk about it.
Yeah,
exactly. Where is it in the political domain? I don't hear anyone saying, we need a strong Australia, because if anyone did say that, of course, they're flying a swastika or shaving their head or doing something like that, and it's like... people get all the wrong impression. There are a bunch of Australians out there that want a stronger national identity, including migrants and their children who feel like they don't really quite belong because they're sitting on the fringes of society, a society that they want to belong to, but because of the strange perceptions that we have of each other, we just don't let them in. Yes. And these guys can be our best friends, basically, if we let them. But keeping, marginalized groups and communities who want to be part of the national identity at arm's length, thanks multiculturalism, by the way, if we do that, we're only going to engender the kind of problems that we've been seeing since the war on terrorism started in this country.
And look, the trigger point in Australia, I think, currently is the subject of Australia Day.
Yep.
We have a real opportunity in this country to make Australia Day for what it really should be, and look at the division. And you can't get people to agree. Local councils like Mitcham have locked the ratepayers into not having Australia Day on the day for a decade or more.
When were you asked?
Well, the people of Mitcham, the elected members who would happily tell us, Jeremy, that they believe in public consultancy and public opinion. They deemed it not the right thing to do. Like Richard Marles has decided the gender question on the census is a sensitive subject. We don't want to create division, so we're not going to allow the Census Department to ask the question. So
even though they did last time.
These people like Mitcham Council have decided on our behalf to say, if you make the decision, that'll cause division, so we'll make the decision for you and still cause division. That's the outcome.
Great
because
logic.
The division is there.
I don't know if you guys saw the article that Dr. Kevin Donnelly wrote in the Advertiser. I didn't see it in the paper, but a friend of mine sent me a screenshot of it. Right. If Caroline is listening, she might bring me my telephone. It's a little hard to read off the screen of a telephone, but it talks about the very thing that you, Doctor, you were talking about a moment ago, and this is this whole perception that we have of Australia and of ourselves and of Australians generally. And he puts it all down to this business of woke. In fact, he's written a book about woke Australia, which is very interesting.
Yep.
I'll have to find it. Thanks, Caroline. I'll have to find it. We did invite him on the program, didn't we, Caroline? I'm pretty sure we did.
So if countries have strong rules and definitions of how the public should behave, you need that framework to have control. It's like the discipline that you would have in the military. There are rules and regulations. There are rules of combat. There are rules of engagement. People tend to have to follow those rules.
Well, they have to because of the other thing as well, and that is unit cohesion. You don't want to get all your soldiery together and they all go off and do their own thing. So the same thing goes for a society or for a country. Yes, have your country, make it up any which way you like, but, make sure that they're all marching in the same direction. Otherwise, there's no future for the country. There's a future for this group, there's a future for that group, there's a future for some other group, but as a totality, there's no future for anyone because we don't think in those terms.
But in Singapore, as I mentioned earlier in the program, these are the type of signs that are in Singapore. Says, and this is from the Singapore police, moment of anger, lifetime of regret, punishment for voluntarily causing hurt, imprisonment up to 2 years and or fine of up to $5,000.
Yep.
Here in Australia, you can go to a hotel, someone will king hit you from behind, someone will pick up a glass you in the face, you're disfigured for life, and the court system will put you out in bail within 5 minutes. And then if you go to court, you might get a suspended sentence where someone's life has been ruined. Well, that's not the sort of discipline that I believe should be in Australia. We should be firmer, stronger. There should be rules, regulations. And if you have those rules and regulations, well, I think we have a much better opportunity for a cohesive and regimented society where people don't misbehave.
The thing is that, the laws of the land have to apply to everybody. It doesn't matter what your skin colour is. It doesn't matter what your belief structure is, it doesn't matter what your religion is. The thing is that we have a strong center around which we all live. It's our umbrella. It's what protects us. It's what we work and strive towards to keep going. That is Australia. Now, we can all subscribe to something like that. But again, you know, societies and polities can be corrupted by various people in various places who then think, well, you know, this person who I know as my dear, dear friend has done something wrong. I'll give this one a hard pass, but that person over there who's done exactly the same thing but is financially not able to support himself with a Queen's counsellor, I'm going to throw the book at, so I can make a public example of. So we have to also be very honest in the way that we apply this disciplinarian approach. It's got to be strong across the board. Rich, poor, middle class, don't care. That's your law. It applies. And it has to, and you're absolutely right, it's got to apply with a judiciary that has a very deep understanding of what the discipline that you talk about is all about. You know, that must be the thing that drives our country. Other than that, what we end up doing is we end up being a country like Iran. We'll have all our little pockets of various groups and ethnicities and religions running around doing their own thing, ever so often having fights with each other. We're already starting to see Australian societies fraying at the edges. You know, all we need to do now is continue down the path that we currently have, which of course is the line of least resistance, because most politicians will say, she'll be right, mate, no worries, you know, just go on. Everything's okay, yeah, all right, yeah, just keep on going, see what happens in 25 years from now. But with the kind of international ructions that we're facing at the moment, and with technology being as it is, all pervasive, it won't be 25 years, it'll be not even 5 years before we start seeing some really terrible things happening on the shores of our country. And if we don't get our act together, no one will, help us get across the line. This is something for us to struggle with and get on top of as soon as possible. But I don't see anyone having that discussion.
Well, look, I was in Europe in 2015 when the huge influx of migrants into Europe, and they were a type of migrant. Let's not say they were all migrants from all over the planet. They were a type of migrant. And I saw it in London, I saw it in Paris, I saw it all over where they were in parks and gardens loitering. Some were defecating into fountains. Totally alien culture to the local inhabitants, the native inhabitants. And that was only 2015. Returning to Europe now, as you can see, I've got a beard at the moment. Yep. That's my jihadi appearance because as a white man wearing a crucifix in Europe at the moment, you make yourself a target. Yeah. You make yourself a target. It's not something you want to say openly or deliberately, but that's the truth now. That is the truth.
But we're walking away from all the things that made our Western cultures great. And I mean, I think that there is this speaker, Douglas Murray. He's written about the death of Europe and the death of European culture and the way that we keep on stripping back all the things that once used to make us something. And the funny thing is that we've broken ourselves down in the international realm to such a point that to a point of irrelevance, basically. You know, white culture, Christian culture. It has no bearing on modern multicultural atheistic values. So we just let all the people come, and whatever pathology they present with, we just have to be tolerant about and just enjoy the diversity. Well, you know, when that diversity comes knocking on your door doing something terrible, who do you go to? You can't go to a judiciary that supports a multicultural society because they will say, oh, but look, you know, that person came from a traumatized society. Of course he was going to king hit you because he thought maybe you weren't the right, I don't know, whatever. And that's not how we should run the country, right?
You know, and Douglas Murray's interesting, Dr. John, because he's one he's written another book called The War on the West.
Yes, that's
right.
And
he talks about critical race theory, and this is something that Jeremy and I spoke to earlier. And critical race theory, which goes back to the 70s and emanating out of the United States, is now, in my view, part of the new cultural revolution, or the revolution that's affecting the world. And I think that's morphed into climate change, it's morphed into gender, it's morphed into immigration, it's morphed into diversity, equity, inclusion, which people call DEI. And when you look at the issues of DEI, and you look at, I noticed Dr. Plimer has come in, and Professor Plimer, I should say, and interesting to have the subject conversation about climate change, because these are all rooted in the same sort of narrative of people coming up making assertions, no factual background, no data, no history, but these academics and their activist academics who have made these pronouncements about what the world is doing and how they're doing it. And as I said to Jeremy this morning, if you say something to someone who doesn't know about the subject, tell them something they don't know, they'll believe you.
Yep, sure.
That's the way the general population is behaving. We've been fed all these narratives about climate change based on not fact, just things that have been made up. Immigration, things that have been made up. Critical race theory, things have been made up. And the world is rotating around all these things and believing it.
And you know, the funny thing is that where is the resistance to all of this, right? So, okay, we mentioned the name Douglas Murray. He's not everyone's cup of tea, and I will say that I will have my differences with him on some points. But overall, I think that he's a good, articulate speaker that can unpack a lot of the things that we're talking about here and come up with an idea of what to do to combat it. But really, we need politics to take a lead on all of this. And I'm talking mainstream politics, you know, because if we don't have the mainstream politicians stepping up into the plate, we're going to lose everything.
Dr. John, thank you very much for coming. Where can we hear your podcast? Because you're very active, you and Sage, aren't you?
Yes, we are. Okay, well, the easiest way is on the website, www.sageinternational.com.au.
Dr. John Bruni.